Hey everyone, and welcome to Medieval Nocturnes. Tonight, we're journeying to a world of elegant discipline and profound, unforgiving order. Feudal Japan. It's a land that lives in our imagination, painted with cherry blossoms, noble samurai, and silent temples shrouded in mist. But beneath the silk and steel lies a reality so rigid, so demanding, that it would crush the spirit of most modern people before they even finished their morning tea. This isn't just history. It's a glimpse into a world where your every breath is governed by rules you can't see and a hierarchy you can never escape. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's always incredible to see our community span the globe. Now, dim your lights, settle in, and let the quiet hum of history carry you away as we explore the life that awaited you in old Japan. Your place in the world isn't a suggestion, it's a sentence handed down by your ancestors. There is no career path, no dream to follow, no reinvention of the self. Your birth is your brand, your blood is your resume, and your future is a straight, unpaved road leading exactly where your father's road lead. Society is locked into four primary tiers, a pyramid of purpose from which there is no escape. At the top are the samurai, the warrior class, tasked with protection, governance, and the crushing weight of honor. Below them are the peasants and farmers, the backbone of the nation, whose sweat produces the rice that feeds everyone else. Then come the artisans, the craftsmen who create the tools, swords, and pottery of daily life. And at the bottom of this official structure are the merchants, the traders and shopkeepers who deal in coin and commerce. You don't apply for these roles. You are born into them, and there you will stay. But even beneath the bottom, there is another level, a class so reviled they were considered untouchable. These were the Eta or Burakamin, the outcasts who performed jobs deemed spiritually unclean. They were the butchers who handled dead animals, the tanners who worked with leather, and the executioners who carried out the state's justice. Society depended on their labor, but pretended they didn't exist, forcing them to live in separate hamlets and forbidding them from mixing with other classes. They were ghosts with vital jobs, essential but invisible. You might think being a merchant with your hands on actual money would be a comfortable position. You'd be wrong. In the Confucian worldview that shaped Japan, merchants were near the bottom because they profited from the labor of others without creating anything themselves. They were seen as parasitic, their wealth a sign of moral weakness, not success. You could be rich, but you would never be respected by the farmer who was starving. The tax system is brutal and based entirely on rice. A peasant family might cultivate a field with back-breaking labor, only to see 40, 50, or even 60% of their harvest taken by their local lord, the daimyo. What's left is what you live on. If the harvest is poor, you starve. If you try to hide a portion of the rice to feed your children, you've committed theft against your lord. That's not a fine. That's treason, an offense punishable by death. You might imagine that life in the past was universally grimy, a world of mud-caked boots and unwashed bodies. But in feudal Japan, you would be shockingly, painfully wrong. Cleanliness was not just a preference, it was a core tenet of the Shinto faith, a social requirement, and a discipline practiced with near-religious fervor. This sounds pleasant until you realize this obsession with purity comes without any of our modern conveniences. There is no hot water on demand, no private bathroom, and no escaping the judgment of your neighbors. The water is drawn from a well or a nearby stream, and in the winter it is brutally breathtakingly frigid. There is no negotiation with the cold. It is a test of fortitude. You splash the water on your skin, the chill seeping into your bones, a stark and immediate reminder that comfort is a luxury you cannot afford. For most, vigorous scrubbing with a cloth and cold water would have to suffice. Your dental hygiene is equally rustic. Teeth were often cleaned by rubbing them with coarse salt or using a frayed twig, a fusiogi, to scrub away grime. Every aspect of personal grooming was a chore, a necessary ritual to keep spiritual and social impurity at bay. You would bathe, completely naked, alongside your landlord, the grumpy woman from the market, and the local, samurai'd, stern-faced attendant. The silence would be heavy, broken only by the sound of splashing water, as everyone pretended this wasn't deeply and profoundly awkward. Only once you were thoroughly cleansed were you permitted to enter the communal tub for a silent, contemplative soak. To bring dirt into the shared water was a grave social sin, an act of disrespect to the entire community that would earn you shame and scorn you might never live down. For the samurai, this pressure for cleanliness was magnified tenfold. A warrior's appearance was a direct reflection of their inner discipline and their respect for their lord. A samurai was expected to be immaculate at all times. A dirty set of fingernails could be interpreted as a sign of laziness. A wrinkled robe could be seen as disrespect. Even a stray hair was a mark of imperfection. Your daimyo could summon you at any moment, and to appear before him in a state of disarray was to risk not just your reputation, but potentially your position. They were expected to embody grace and purity. Their skin was to be flawless, their movements poised, and their hair was an elaborate work of art, often styled with combs, pins, and oil in complex arrangements that could take hours to create and were designed to last for days. All this was done not to sit idly, but to then perform the demanding physical labor of running a household, all while maintaining an air of effortless dignity. The reality of being a samurai is less about glory and more about living in a state of constant soul-crushing anxiety, where a single misstep can lead to your complete and utter ruin. Your entire existence is governed by Bushido, the way of the warrior. This isn't just a set of rules for combat. It's an unwritten, all-encompassing code of conduct that dictates your every action, thought, and breath. It demands absolute loyalty, unwavering self-discipline, and a level of honor so profound that it makes everyday life a minefield of potential disgrace. You don't just follow Bushido, you embody it, and if you fail, the consequences are unimaginable. First and foremost, your life does not belong to you. It belongs to your lord, your daimyo. His commands are not suggestions, they are absolute. His moods dictate the climate of your world. Your sole purpose is to serve him with such fanatical loyalty that the idea of disappointing him is more terrifying than death itself. Disobedience, failure in a task, even a moment of perceived disrespect, any of these can shatter your world in an instant. There is no such thing as a small mistake. The concept of honor, or maho, is the air you breathe and the ghost that haunts you. Losing face is not a minor embarrassment. It's a spiritual stain that pollutes you and your entire family. Speaking out of turn in a council meeting is dishonor. Failing to avenge an insult is dishonor. Showing fear in battle is dishonor. Even something as trivial as an inappropriate joke during a tea ceremony could be twisted into an act of disrespect, and suddenly you are standing on the precipice of oblivion. And when dishonor becomes too great to bear, There is only one culturally acceptable path to redemption: seppuku. This is the infamous ritual suicide, where a samurai is expected to end his own life to restore his lost honor. You kneel, compose yourself, and take a short blade to your own abdomen. We'll stop there. The point is, this wasn't a rare or mythologized event. It was a respected, and sometimes required, method for a samurai to cleanse their name and spare their family from the shame of their failure. Your lord might even gift you the opportunity after a major blunder. On top of this psychological pressure, your life is one of endless, grueling training. You must master swordsmanship, kenjutsu, archery, kujutsu, and horsemanship, bajutsu. But that's not enough. A true samurai was also expected to be a cultured scholar. You had to practice calligraphy, shodo, compose poetry, waka, and understand the complex rituals of the tea ceremony. You were required to be both a killer and a poet, a warrior and an artist, embodying a perfect and impossible balance of ferocity and refinement. All of this had to be done with an expression of stoic calm. Emotional outbursts were a sign of poor discipline and a weak character. To laugh too loudly was unrefined. To show fear was contemptible. To grieve openly was a shameful loss of composure. You were expected to cultivate a mask of impenetrable serenity, even as you navigated a world of constant peril and judgment. Your emotions were a prison from which you could never let anyone see you escape. So, you weren't born a samurai. You've escaped the constant threat of ritual disembowelment and the suffocating pressure of courtly etiquette. That's the good news. The bad news is you've been born a peasant, which means your existence is now an endless cycle of dirt, sweat, back pain, and the quiet terror of not making your rice quota. You are the foundation upon which this entire society is built, and you will be rewarded for it with nothing but hardship. You wake with the first light of the sun, not out of a sense of serene connection with nature, but because your thatched-roof hut is little more than a pile of sticks and mud, and the cold morning air is your alarm clock. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a small bowl of watery rice, porridge, or millet, perhaps with a sliver of pickled radish if it's been a good month. If it's been a bad month, breakfast is a cup of water and the act of pretending you aren't hungry. Then, it's off to the rice paddies. In paintings, they look tranquil and beautiful. In reality, they are vast pits of mud designed to systematically destroy your body over the course of a 12-hour day. You spend your life ankle-deep in cold, murky water, planting delicate seedlings in spring, pulling endless weeds in summer, and harvesting the grain with a small hand scythe in autumn. Your back screams, your hands are raw, and your mind is consumed by a single thought. Will this be enough? Taxes are the shadow that looms over your entire life. You are not paid for your work in coin. You pay for the privilege of existing with the food you grow. The local samurai official arrives after the harvest to assess your yield, and he will take a staggering portion of it, sometimes more than half, for the daimyo. Your family survives on what is left. A drought, a flood, or a pest infestation doesn't just mean a poor harvest. It means starvation is a very real possibility, and you have absolutely no power to change this. Do you want to complain to the village headman about the crushing tax rate? That's adorable. Speaking out is not just frowned upon, it is an act of rebellion. Complaining could get you whipped, exiled, or simply cut down, where you stand by a samurai who feels you have disrespected his authority. You are legally forbidden from leaving your village without permission. In effect, you are a prisoner on the land you work, tied to the soil by law and by necessity. Life is not entirely without joy. There are village festivals, or matsuri, tied to the seasons and Shinto rituals. These are moments of brief, precious release, where you might drink some rough sake, share a meal with your neighbors, and dance to the sound of drums. It's a fleeting escape, a collective breath held before the plunge back into endless labor. For a day, you can forget the aching muscles and the empty pantry, but the rice paddies are always waiting. You are the economic engine of Japan. Your rice feeds the armies, the lords, the artisans, and the emperor himself. Without your labor, the entire system would collapse into chaos and famine. Yet, you are regarded as little more than a tool, a resource to be managed and exploited. Your individual life, your hopes, your pains, they are utterly insignificant in the grand calculus of power. You are essential, and you are disposable, a cruel paradox that defines your every waking moment. You've somehow survived the morning, whether through stoic discipline or back-breaking labor. Now you're hungry. But in feudal Japan, a meal is not an opportunity for indulgence or culinary exploration. It is a strictly functional, often grim, affair. Food is fuel. Scarcity is the main ingredient in every dish, and your primary goal is to consume enough calories to continue serving your purpose in the great, unyielding machine of society. If you are a peasant, your diet is overwhelmingly simple. Grain. You eat rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, and rice for dinner. But calling it rice is often generous. To make the precious grain last, it was usually mixed with cheaper, heartier fillers, like barley, millet, or wheat. This was served with a side of whatever pickled vegetable was in season, a few slices of sharp, salty radish, daikon, or a preserved turnip. That's it. That is the taste of your life. What about meat? Forget it. Due to the influence of Buddhism, eating the flesh of four-legged animals was largely taboo for much of Japanese history. And besides, your ox is far more valuable as a draft animal than as a meal. Fish was more common, especially near the coast, but for inland communities, it was a luxury. When you did get it, it was rarely fresh. It was dried, salted, and cured to last, making it intensely fishy and tough enough to chew on for an hour. As a samurai, your diet is certainly better, but it's still governed by strict rules and hierarchy. You might eat more white rice, enjoy fresh fish, and have a wider variety of vegetables. However, you do not eat when you are hungry. You eat when you are permitted. At a formal meal, your lord, the daimyo, eats first, along with any honored guests. You and the other retainers eat last, often after the best portions are gone and the food has grown cold. You eat this cold meal with an expression of deep gratitude. Everything you consume is ruthlessly seasonal. There is no refrigeration, no global supply chain. If it isn't growing in a nearby field or swimming in a local river right now, you are not eating it. This means your diet can be incredibly monotonous for months on end, and winter is a long, lean season of hunger. The harvest is stored, but supplies dwindle. The cold months are a quiet battle against starvation, a time when fasting wasn't a choice, but a simple fact of life. Food could also be a source of danger. Without modern food safety, a piece of bad fish could lead to sickness or death. Medical care was a mixture of herbal remedies and prayers. Your chances of surviving a serious bout of food poisoning were slim. The desperation for food also made theft a serious crime. Stealing a few vegetables from a neighbor's plot or a handful of rice from your lord's storehouse wasn't treated as petty crime. It was a grave offense that could result in public humiliation, brutal punishment, or execution. You might have heard of the famous Japanese tea ceremony, or chenowu, but this was not a casual affair for quenching thirst. It was a highly sophisticated and rigid ritual, a form of performance art where every single gesture, from how you held the cup to the way you whisked the powdered green tea matcha, was laden with meaning. It was less about refreshment and more about demonstrating your culture, refinement, and understanding of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and transience. To make a mistake was to reveal your own lack of cultivation. Imagine this. You've just finished your meager meal, and you overhear your village elder confidently declare that a string of bad harvests is due to a shortage of honorable badgers in the forest. Or perhaps you watch a local samurai official demonstrate a sword technique so clumsy it's more likely to endanger himself than an enemy. Your modern brain, wired for debate and discussion, screams at you to correct them, to offer a better idea, to speak the truth. Do not. In feudal Japan, your opinion is not a gift. It is a dangerous weapon that is most likely to harm yourself. The concept of free speech, as you know it, does not exist. It is not a right, it is a fast track to ruin. The social hierarchy is a rigid, unyielding structure, and every word you speak has a specific weight and value determined by your place within it. Your words are not judged on their merit or their truth, but on who you are when you speak them. Silence is not just golden. It is the currency of survival. Speaking to someone of a different social class is like navigating a field of invisible explosives. If you are a peasant, you do not question a samurai, ever. To do so is an act of supreme insolence that could get you killed on the spot, and no one would bat an eye. If you are a merchant, you do not offer unsolicited business advice to a samurai, lest it be seen as an arrogant implication that your commercial mind is superior to his warrior spirit. Every interaction is a test of your ability to show deference. Even for the samurai who are trained in rhetoric, speech is a high-stakes performance. A samurai is expected to speak with measure.com and profound humility, especially in the presence of his lord. A sharp tongue or a quick retort is not a sign of wit. It is a sign of a disorderly mind and a lack of discipline. A misplaced word could be interpreted as a challenge, forcing another samurai into the awkward position of having to duel you to restore his honor. This is why apologies in feudal Japan are an elaborate art form. You don't just say, "My mistake." You perform your remorse. It involves deep, prolonged bowing, profusely shameful language, and a complete submission of your own ego. You might have to present a gift as a token of your sincerity, all while praying the offended party accepts your apology instead of escalating the matter. The goal isn't just to say sorry, it's to publicly restore the social harmony your foolish words disrupted. In almost every conceivable situation, silence is the wisest and most honorable path. It is a sign of deep thought, of self-control, and of a keen understanding of your place in the cosmos. A silent person cannot misspeak. A silent person cannot offend. While you may be boiling with disagreement or bursting with a brilliant idea, you learn to swallow it, to let it die in the back of your throat. Your unspoken thoughts are the only truly safe place you have. Even something as universal as humor is a tightrope walk over a pit of swords. Laughing at a joke made by your superior is mandatory, but laughing too hard might suggest a familiarity you haven't earned. Telling a joke yourself is even riskier. If it doesn't land, you've not only embarrassed yourself, but you may have inadvertently insulted someone important. Your sense of humor is a luxury you cannot afford to indulge without careful calculation. In the modern world, what you wear is a form of self-expression, a way to signal your personality, your mood, or your allegiances. In feudal Japan, this concept would be dangerously absurd. Fashion is not about you, it is about the system. Your clothing is a uniform, a walking billboard that tells everyone, instantly and without a single word, exactly who you are, what you do, and most importantly, whether they are above or below you in the social order. At the top of this sartorial pyramid is the samurai. His attire is a masterclass in controlled dignity. He wears multiple layers of clothing, typically a silk kimono under wide-legged trousers called hakama. The fabrics are fine. The colors are deep and sober, earthy browns, somber blues, and rich indigos. His family crest, or mon, might be subtly displayed on his outer garment, a clear marker of his lineage. His entire outfit is designed to project an aura of authority, discipline, and readiness. Of course, the ultimate samurai accessory is not fabric but steel. The daisho, the paired long and short swords, the katana and wakizashi, is the undeniable symbol of his status. These are not merely weapons, they are his badge of office, the physical manifestation of his right to enforce the law and protect his lord. To wear them improperly is a disgrace. To touch a samurai's sword without permission is to invite death, and for him to draw one in public is an act so serious it could change the fate of everyone around him. Now look at the peasant. His wardrobe is a study in humility and function. He wears simple garments made of coarse materials like hemp, or, if he's fortunate, rough cotton. The colors are the colors of the earth itself, drab browns, muted grays, and faded indigo from the cheapest dyes. His clothes are durable enough for a day of hard labor in the fields, and simple enough that they imply no sense of personal vanity. His outfit says, "I work in the dirt, and I expect nothing more." The merchants present a fascinating paradox. They often had more disposable income than the samurai, but they had to be incredibly careful not to show it too ostentatiously. A merchant might wear silk, but it would be in a subdued, understated pattern. He could afford luxury, but flaunting it would be seen as an arrogant challenge to the social order. This could attract the unwanted and dangerous attention of a samurai who felt the merchant was getting above his station. The goal was to look successful, but not too successful. Artisans and craftsmen dressed for their trade. Their clothing was practical, sturdy, and clean, but always modest. Like everyone else below the samurai, their primary sartorial goal was to be unobtrusive. To draw attention to oneself through flashy clothing was considered a sign of a flawed character. It suggested you were more concerned with appearances than with your duties, a dangerous implication in a society built on fulfilling one's prescribed role. For women, clothing was an even more complex language of symbols. A woman's kimono was a codebook. The length of her sleeves could indicate if she was married or single. The colors and patterns were strictly dictated by the season, the occasion, and her age. To wear a cherry blossom pattern in autumn was not a quirky fashion statement. It was a jarring mistake, a sign of ignorance that would bring shame upon her and her family. Her entire being, from her hairstyle down to her sandals, was a performance of conformity. your mind might drift to romantic images of feudal Japan. You picture two lovers meeting in secret under a weeping willow, exchanging passionate poetry as blossoms fall around them. A noble samurai, a mysterious princess, a love that defies the odds. This is a beautiful story. It is also almost entirely a fantasy. In feudal Japan, love is not the foundation of a life together. It is a dangerous complication, a personal feeling that has no place in a world built on duty. Marriage is not a union of hearts. It is a transaction. For every class, from the lowest peasant to the highest lord, marriage is an arrangement, a strategic alliance designed to benefit the family, not the individual. Romantic compatibility is not on the checklist. The goal is stability, the continuation of a bloodline, and the consolidation of power or property. Feelings are, at best, an irrelevant distraction, and, at worst, a threat to the entire arrangement. If you are a peasant, your marriage will be arranged by your parents with the input of the village elder. They are not looking for someone who makes you laugh or shares your dreams. They are looking for a good match in practical terms. Does the proposed partner come from a hardworking family? Are they healthy and strong, capable of working the fields and producing children? These are the questions that matter. Your personal preference is not one of them. For the samurai class, the stakes are infinitely higher, and the process is even more impersonal. A samurai marriage is a political instrument. You will marry the daughter of another warrior to seal an alliance between your clans, to secure a valuable piece of land, or to end a long-standing feud. You might meet your betrothed for the first time on the day of your wedding. Your duty is not to love her, but to accept her as part of a contract that serves your lord and your family. And if you are a woman, you have the least say of all. As the daughter of a samurai, you are a political pawn, a valuable asset to be traded for your family's advancement. You will be married off, sometimes as young as 14 or 15, to a man you do not know. Your entire education in etiquette, music, and household management has been to prepare you for this role. Your duty is to be an obedient wife, a capable household manager, and, most importantly, the mother of a male heir. Your own heart is a locked room to which no one must ever have the key. This isn't to say that romantic love didn't exist. It did, but it thrived in the realm of art and fiction. It was the subject of heartbreaking no-plays, tragic poems, and famous stories like the tale of Genji. In fiction, love was a powerful, beautiful force. In real life, it was a fire that could burn down your entire world. To act on such feelings, especially outside the bonds of your arranged marriage, was to court absolute disaster. The consequences for illicit romance were severe. Adultery was one of the gravest crimes, particularly for a woman. If discovered, it brought unimaginable shame upon two entire families. The punishment was not a quiet divorce. It could be exile, public humiliation, or even death. A dishonored husband or father might be expected to kill the offending parties himself to restore the family's honor. Love was a private feeling, but disgrace was a very public spectacle. In our modern lives, we often treat death as a distant, abstract event, something to be postponed and kept out of sight. In feudal Japan, death is not an abstraction. It is your neighbor. It is a constant, tangible presence that shapes every aspect of society, from the warrior's code to the farmer's prayer. You don't plan for a long and comfortable retirement. You live with the quiet understanding that your end could come at any time, and your only choice is whether you will meet it with dignity. For the samurai, death is a tool, the final expression of his honor. We've spoken of seppuku, the ritual of suicide to atone for failure or disgrace. This philosophy means a warrior lives with his death already accepted. He is expected to enter battle with the calm resolve of a man who has already made peace with his end. His mortality is not a source of fear, but the ultimate testament to his discipline. A noble death in service to his lord is the highest achievement he can aspire to. The peasant, however, does not have the luxury of a planned, honorable exit. For him, death is a common thief that lurks around every corner. It comes in the form of a failed rice harvest, where a drought or flood condemns his family to starvation. It arrives as a plague that sweeps through his village, with no medicine to stop it beyond herbal remedies and whispered prayers. Death is a bandit's blade on a lonely road, or a simple infection from a cut that festers without hope of healing. The world outside your small village is fraught with peril. The roads connecting towns are not safe highways. They are prowled by masterless samurai known as ronin, bandits, and desperate men who would kill you for your sandals and the half-eaten rice ball in your pack. This is why most people never traveled. An errand to the next province was not a casual trip. It was a life-threatening expedition that many would never return from. For women, the simple act of bringing life into the world was one of the most dangerous things she could do. Childbirth was a terrifying gamble. With no understanding of modern hygiene or surgical procedures, complications that would be routine today were almost always a death sentence. A midwife did what she could with experience and herbs, but if something went wrong, the family could do little more than pray as they lost both mother and child. And then there is nature itself. Japan is a land of incredible beauty and terrifying violence. It is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a region constantly shaken by earthquakes that can level a town in seconds. Those earthquakes can trigger monstrous tsunamis that swallow coastal villages whole. Add to that the seasonal typhoons that bring devastating floods and winds, and the occasional volcanic eruption that can bury the landscape in ash, and you realize you are living at the mercy of forces far beyond your control. Perhaps the most alien concept to a modern mind is the expected reaction to all this death. Calm acceptance. To rage against your fate, to wail in grief, or to show terror in the face of your own end was considered undignified and shameful. The ideal, embodied by the samurai, but expected of all, was to meet death with a stoic, almost serene composure. The ultimate expression of this was the jizei or death poem, a short verse composed in one's final moments to capture a pure, final observation on life and transience. In modern society, you are encouraged from birth to find yourself, follow your passion, and live your truth. These phrases form the very foundation of our worldview. In feudal Japan, such ideas would not only be considered dangerous, they would be fundamentally incomprehensible. There is no you to find, separate from the whole. The cult of the individual does not exist. To try and be a unique star is to invite the darkness to snuff you out. Your identity is not your own. It belongs to your family, your household, your i.e. You are not a singular person, but a single link in a long, unbroken chain stretching back through generations of ancestors and forward to the descendants you are obligated to produce. You are a representative, a temporary custodian of a family name that is infinitely more important than your own fleeting existence. Your life is not your story. It is a single chapter in the epic of your clan. This collective identity comes with a dense, suffocating web of obligations. You have duties to your parents, who raised you, to your ancestors, whose honor you must uphold, to your lord, whose land you live on, and to your village, which depends on your cooperation. Personal ambition, the desire to pursue a goal for your own fulfillment, is seen for what it is in this context, a profound act of selfishness. To choose your own path is to betray everyone who depends on you to walk the prescribed one. Because the group is everything, the consequences of your actions are never yours alone. Shame, or haji, is a contagion that infects your entire household. If you commit a crime, your siblings might be shunned, your parents disgraced. A scandal doesn't just ruin your reputation. It can ruin your family's social standing for a generation. This is not guilt by association. It is existence by association. The weight of this collective responsibility is immense, a constant check on any impulse toward individuality. Do you dream of being a poet? That's lovely. Unfortunately, your family have been blacksmiths for 200 years, so you will learn to forge steel until your hands are calloused and your ears ring with the sound of the hammer. Do you have a talent for painting? Excellent. You will use that talent to decorate the screens in your lord's residence, following traditional patterns with dutiful precision. Your passions are only useful insofar as they serve the needs of your family and superiors. This is true even at the highest levels of society. A samurai does not charge into battle seeking personal glory. He fights and dies for the honor of his clan and the victory of his daimyo. His individual heroism is meaningless unless it contributes to the group's success. A spectacular death that elevates his lord's name is infinitely more valuable than a long life lived for his own pleasure. He is a tool, albeit a very sharp and honored one, for the ambitions of others. There is a famous Japanese proverb that perfectly encapsulates this worldview. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. This is not just a quaint saying. It is the central operating principle of the society. To be different is to be a threat to social harmony. To be exceptional is to invite suspicion. To be original is to court disaster. Your survival depends on your ability to conform, to blend in, to be a predictable and reliable part of the whole. Let's say you've somehow managed to navigate the treacherous social hierarchies, the complex etiquette, and the crushing weight of duty. You've survived the judgment of your peers and the demands of your superiors. Congratulations. Now you have to survive the land itself. Feudal Japan is a place of breathtaking natural beauty, mist-shrouded mountains, serene bamboo forests, and delicate cherry blossoms. It is also a land that actively tries to kill you on a regular basis. First come the typhoons. These are not just storms. They are monstrous, howling gods of wind and rain that descend from the sea with terrifying force. Imagine huddling in your small house made of wood, mud, and paper, as the wind screams like a vengeful spirit, threatening to rip the thatched roof from over your head. The rain falls in blinding sheets, turning your village into a sea of mud and washing away the rice plants you spent months cultivating. Then there are the earthquakes. They arrive without warning, a sudden, violent shudder from deep within the earth. There is no alert system, no time to run. One moment you are mending a tool. The next, the ground is bucking beneath you, and your home is collapsing around you. In the tightly packed wooden cities like Kyoto or Edo, The greatest danger came after the shaking stopped. Fire. A single overturned lantern could spark a blaze that would sweep through the wooden buildings, consuming entire districts in a matter of hours. The whims of water are a constant source of terror. Too much rain brings devastating floods, swelling the rivers until they burst their banks, drowning fields, livestock, and homes. But too little rain is just as deadly. A prolonged drought leaves the earth cracked and barren, the rice shoots withered and brown. Either way, the result is the same. The harvest fails, and the specter of famine looms over the entire community, turning neighbors into rivals for the last remaining scraps of food. And do not be fooled by romantic paintings of snow-covered pagodas. The winter is a season of profound, bone-deep cold. Your home has thin paper walls that offer little protection from the freezing winds. There is no central heating. Your only source of warmth is a small charcoal brazier, or hibachi, which offers a pitiful circle of heat while filling the room with fumes. You sleep buried under every blanket you own, praying you don't succumb to frostbite or the quiet, creeping death of hypothermia. Looming over everything are the volcanoes. Japan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most geologically active regions on the planet. An eruption could occur at any time, spewing ash that chokes the sky, poisons the land and water, and buries villages completely. Mount Fuji may be a symbol of serene beauty, but it and dozens of other volcanoes are sleeping giants, a constant reminder that the very ground beneath your feet can become your enemy. In the face of these disasters, there is no one coming to help you. There is no government relief agency, no emergency fund, no organized aid. If an earthquake destroys your home, you and your neighbors must rebuild it from the rubble. If a flood washes away your crop, you will bear the loss alone. And through it all, your Lord will still expect his taxes to be paid. A natural disaster is not considered a valid excuse for failing in your duties. In feudal Japan, power flows in one direction. Down it pours from the top of a steep and unmoving pyramid, and with it come orders, responsibilities, and when things go wrong, the blame. You might think that if you were born into a higher station, you would finally be your own master. You would be mistaken. No matter where you stand, there is always someone standing above you, and their shadow dictates the course of your life. If you're a peasant, your world is governed by the village headman. He is your immediate authority, the one who organizes labor and collects taxes. But he is not the source of power. He answers to a local samurai official, a jittu, who manages the estate on behalf of a greater lord. The headman is merely the lowest rung on a ladder that stretches far above his head, and he passes the pressure he receives from above directly onto you. The samurai themselves, who appear as figures of absolute authority to the common folk, are little more than well-armed middle managers. They live and die in service to their lord, the daimyo. They fight in wars they did not start, over disputes they may not understand, for land they will never personally own. Their power is entirely borrowed from their lord, and it can be taken away in an instant for a single failure or a hint of disloyalty. And what of the daimyo? These great lords rule over entire provinces, command armies of thousands of samurai, and live in fortified castles. They seem like kings in their own right, but even they live in a state of perpetual anxiety, for they all must answer to one man, the shogun. The shogun is the true military dictator of Japan. If he suspects a daimyo is becoming too powerful or too ambitious, He can demand that the lord travel to the capital, reassign his lands, or even order him to commit seppuku. But surely, the shogun, the most powerful man in the country, is a true master of his own fate. Not even close. His position is a precarious balancing act. He must constantly play rival clans against each other, manage a fragile national economy, and be ever watchful for betrayal. Plots, coups, and assassinations are a constant threat, often coming from his own ambitious relatives. The shogun holds the most power, but his throne is also the most dangerous seat in the land. And at the very pinnacle of the hierarchy sits the emperor. In theory, he is the supreme ruler, a living god, and the source of all legitimacy. In reality, he holds almost no political or military power at all. For much of Japan's feudal history, the emperor was a sacred figurehead, kept in splendid isolation in the imperial capital of Kyoto. His role was to perform ancient rituals, approve the shogun's rule, and serve as a symbol of the divine continuity of the Japanese nation. He reigned, but he did not rule. This entire structure is designed for one purpose: to maintain stability by preventing anyone from climbing it. Ambition is not a virtue. It is a disease that threatens the health of the entire system. You are born into your place, and you are expected to stay there. To dream of rising above your station is to dream of your own destruction. The system doesn't reward those who try to climb. It crushes them. In a world where your path is set from birth, what you are allowed to learn is one of the most powerful tools used to keep you on that path. Education in feudal Japan is not about opening minds or fostering critical thinking. It is a highly specialized system designed to forge you into the exact tool your class requires you to be. Knowledge is not a right for all. It is a privilege for the few, and its distribution is carefully, deliberately controlled. If you are born a samurai, your education begins almost as soon as you can walk. You are one of the lucky ones destined for literacy. You will spend countless hours learning to read and write, practicing the elegant, disciplined strokes of calligraphy. Your studies will include Chinese classics, Confucian philosophy, Japanese history, and military strategy. This rigorous academic training is considered just as important as your mastery of the sword and bow. The purpose of this education is clear: to create a ruling class. A samurai was not just a soldier. He was an administrator, a magistrate, and a leader. He needed to be able to read orders, write reports, and understand the ethical and historical principles that justified his authority. His education was designed to make him a pillar of the system, capable of both enforcing the rules and appreciating the high culture he was tasked with protecting. The children of merchants and artisans receive a more practical, vocational education. A merchant's son would be taught what was necessary for business. He would learn arithmetic, likely using a sorabin or abacus, to calculate profits and manage inventory. He would learn enough reading and writing to keep ledgers and communicate with suppliers. His education was not concerned with poetry or philosophy. It was an education in commerce. Your education is the earth, the sky, and the oral traditions of your village. There is no formal school for you. Literacy is a far-off dream, as rare as a full belly in winter. You do not learn from books. You learn from your parents' actions. Your classroom is the rice paddy, and your lessons are taught by the changing seasons. Your father teaches you how to read the weather in the clouds, how to mend a broken hoe, and which pests will ruin a crop. Your mother teaches you how to forage for edible plants, how to weave sandals from straw, and how to make a small portion of rice feed a family for a day. This is a deep and vital knowledge, but it is a knowledge of survival, not of advancement. It prepares you for a life of labor, and nothing more. Unless she was from an exceptionally high-ranking noble family, a girl's training was almost entirely domestic. She would learn the arts of sewing, weaving, and cooking. She would be schooled in the complex etiquette required to manage a household and serve a husband. If she was lucky, she might learn a refined art like playing the koto or the meticulous rituals of the tea ceremony, skills designed to make her a more desirable wife, not an independent thinker. The graceful curve of a temple roof, the serene emptiness of a Zen garden, the delicate pattern on a piece of pottery, everything seems designed to calm the soul and elevate the spirit. But do not be deceived by this tranquility. Culture and art in this world are not forms of gentle recreation. They are disciplines, performances with strict rules and severe consequences for failure. Beauty is just another form of obedience. Consider the tea ceremony, chanuio. From the outside, it appears to be a peaceful, meditative ritual. On the inside, for the participants, it is a high-stakes test of social grace. Every single element is prescribed. How you enter the room, how you kneel, how you handle the utensils, how you turn the tea bowl to admire it, and even the precise words of gratitude you must utter. One clumsy movement or misplaced compliment can mark you as uncultured, a person of poor breeding and little refinement. Or, take ikebana, the art of flower arrangement. This is not simply about making a pretty bouquet. It is a spiritual practice with ancient rules governing balance, harmony, and space. Each arrangement is a living sculpture with stems and blossoms representing the connection between heaven, humanity, and the earth. There are different schools, each with its own rigid philosophy. To arrange the flowers incorrectly is not just an aesthetic failure. It is a moral one, a sign that your own spirit is not in harmony with the universe. We've mentioned calligraphy, or shodo, as a form of writing, but it is revered as one of the highest art forms. The way you wield the brush, the pressure you apply, the flow of the ink on paper. These are thought to be a direct reflection of your soul, your kokoro. A bold, confident stroke reveals a strong character. A hesitant, shaky line reveals a weak or troubled spirit. Your handwriting is not just handwriting. It is a portrait of your inner self, open for all to judge. Even poetry is a cage of beautiful, unyielding rules. You might be moved to write a haiku, but you must do so within the strict 575-syllable structure. The poem must capture a fleeting moment, often tied to a specific season, with elegant simplicity. You cannot pour your raw, messy emotions onto the page. Passion is considered unrefined. Instead, you must hint at your feelings through subtle metaphors of nature. A lonely crow on a winter branch, the scattering of cherry blossoms in the wind. The performing arts are no different. Traditional no theater is a slow, highly stylized, and symbolic drama. Actors move with painstaking deliberation behind carved wooden masks, chanting their lines in a monotonic drone. The stories are tales of ghosts, gods, and warriors, but the beauty is not in realism. It is in the perfect preservation of ancient forms, a ritual that has remained unchanged for centuries. It is meant to be appreciated, not necessarily enjoyed in a modern sense. If you are of the samurai class, you are expected not just to be a warrior, but a connoisseur of these arts. You must be able to recognize a famous potter's work, comment intelligently on a hanging scroll, and perhaps even compose a passable poem yourself. To be ignorant of culture was to be incomplete, a brutish warrior without the soul to appreciate the civilization you were meant to defend. Culture, therefore, becomes just one more arena for potential failure and disgrace. And so, after walking through this world of silent rules, crushing duty, and ever-present danger, we arrive at the final, unavoidable conclusion. Let's be honest with ourselves. You would not last a day in feudal Japan. This is not an indictment of your character, your strength, or your intelligence. It is a simple recognition that the very qualities our modern world celebrates, individuality, curiosity, and a desire for self-determination, would be your fatal flaws. From the moment you woke to the moment you slept, your life would be a relentless series of tests. A test of your posture as you kneel. A test of your loyalty as you obey a senseless command. A test of your self-control as you accept a bland meal while starving. A test of your humility as you bow to the exact, correct degree. In this world, there are no off days, no moments to just be yourself, because yourself is a dangerous liability. The fundamental conflict is this: you were raised to be an individual, while this society was designed to function as a collective. You exist to serve the whole, your family, your village, your lord. To deviate from your role is not an act of bravery. It is a malfunction, a crack in the foundation of the world that must be sealed. The machine requires predictable, interchangeable parts, and you are anything but. If you were born a samurai, you would live in the shadow of a sword, carrying the impossible weight of honor on your shoulders. If you were a peasant, you would be ground down by endless labor, your life's value measured in bags of rice. If you were a woman, your existence would be a masterclass in graceful submission. Your own desires, a silent, forgotten ghost. And for every other role, the system was designed with ruthless efficiency to keep you exactly where you were placed. Yes, feudal Japan was beautiful. Its art, its poetry, its architecture, and its rituals were all crafted with a level of meticulous care and aesthetic refinement that is almost unparalleled. But that beauty was not gentle. It had sharp edges. It was a beauty born of discipline, so intense it could break you, demanding a conformity so absolute that it swallowed individuals whole. It was the serene, cold beauty of a perfectly forged, razor-sharp blade. You would fail because you would ask why, when you were expected to simply obey. You would laugh too loudly when solemnity was required. You would voice an opinion, suggest a better way, or complain about an injustice. You would fall in love with the wrong person. These small human acts of nonconformity would immediately mark you as a disruptive element, a threat to the delicate and brutal harmony of the established order. And that is the final, chilling brilliance of it all. The system wasn't built to be kind or to foster happiness. It was built to endure. In an age of constant warfare, famine, and natural disaster, it created a society of profound stability, held together by the unyielding iron framework of duty, honor, and obedience. It wasn't made for you. It was made to last. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the quiet, unforgiving world of feudal Japan. I hope it has given you a new perspective on this fascinating and complex era. If you enjoy these deep dives into the past and want to support the channel, please consider subscribing to Medieval Nocturnes. Your presence here makes all the difference. Until next time, I wish you a quiet and peaceful night. We leave the shores of Japan, with its sharp steel and silent rules, and travel halfway across the world to a different kind of unforgiving landscape. Our new story begins in the dust and heat of the Holy Land in the early 12th century. The First Crusade has come and gone, leaving a patchwork of fragile crusader states surrounded by hostile territory. Jerusalem is in Christian hands, but the roads leading to it are drenched in blood. This is where a new kind of warrior will be born from piety and desperation. For the thousands of European pilgrims who journeyed to the Holy Land to walk where Jesus had walked, the final leg of their quest was the most dangerous. The route from the port city of Jaffa to the holy city of Jerusalem was a treacherous path, crawling with bandits, highwaymen, and opportunistic raiders who preyed on the vulnerable. Pilgrims traveled in fear, often arriving at the city gates stripped of their possessions, if they arrived at all. To make a pilgrimage was an act of faith, but also a deadly gamble. In the year 1119, a French nobleman named Auguste de Payens and 8 of his relatives and acquaintances proposed a radical solution. They were knights, trained for war, but they were also deeply pious men. They decided to form a new kind of monastic order, one that would dedicate itself not to prayer in a secluded cloister, but to action on these dangerous roads. Their mission was simple and profound: to protect the Christian pilgrims and guard the sacred routes. They were not, at first, a wealthy or powerful group. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, just like traditional monks. They were so poor, in fact, that their official name reflected their humble origins. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. Their famous emblem, depicting 2 knights sharing a single horse, was a symbol of this initial poverty and brotherhood. They were warrior monks, a concept so new it was almost contradictory. Their fortunes began to change when King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, the ruler of the fledgling kingdom, granted them a space for their headquarters. He gave them a wing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which stood on the Temple Mount, a place the Crusaders believed to be the precise location of the biblical Temple of Solomon. From this sacred and strategic location, they derived their popular name, the Knights of the Temple, or simply the Knights Templar. The life of a Templar was one of extreme discipline and duality. In one moment, he was a monk, attending prayers, living communally, and sworn to silence for much of the day. In the next, he was a heavily armed knight, encased in chainmail, charging into battle with a discipline and ferocity that would become legendary. He renounced all personal property, all worldly comforts, and all romantic attachments, dedicating his entire being to God and to the defense of the Holy Land. For the first 9 years of their existence, the Templars remained a small and obscure order. They numbered only 9 founding knights, and they struggled to attract new recruits and funding. The idea of a fighting monk was met with skepticism by many in the church. Could a man who shed blood truly be a man of God? Could a warrior live a life of monastic purity? The order was on the verge of failure, a noble, but perhaps doomed, experiment in faith and steel. For nearly a decade, the Knights Templar were little more than a noble idea, a handful of pious warriors struggling for relevance and survival in the Holy Land. They were poor, few in number, and viewed with suspicion, but the fate of their fledgling order was about to be transformed, not by a victory in battle, but by a victory of persuasion in the heart of Catholic Europe, launching them from obscurity into the highest echelons of power. The turning point came when their founder, Hugues de Payens, traveled back to Europe in 1127 to seek official recognition and support from the Church. He found a powerful champion in a man named Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was not a king or a pope, but he was arguably the most influential churchman of his era. A brilliant Cistercian abbot whose words could sway the powerful and inspire the masses. He saw in the Templars the embodiment of a new, purified form of Christian warfare. With Bernard's formidable backing, the Templars presented their case at the Council of Troyes in 1129. Here, the order was formally recognized by the Catholic Church. Bernard himself wrote a famous treatise for them, titled De Laude Novi Militia, or In Praise of the New Knighthood. In it, he eloquently argued that the Templars were not mere soldiers, but a holy militia, fighting a spiritual war against evil. He contrasted their pious austerity with the vanity and greed of secular knights, effectively creating the powerful image of the Templar as the ultimate Christian warrior. This official recognition was followed in 1139 by something even more powerful, a papal bull known as Omni Datum Optimum, issued by Pope Innocent II. This document was a grant of unprecedented privileges. It declared that the Knights Templar were subject to no authority on earth, except for the Pope himself. They were exempt from paying tithes to local bishops. They could pass freely across all borders, and they were allowed to build their own chapels and cemeteries. In an instant, they became a sovereign power within the heart of Christendom. With the endorsement of both the Church's greatest advocate and the Pope himself, the floodgates of support opened. Donations poured in from every corner of Europe. Kings and queens granted them vast tracts of land. Wealthy nobles bequeathed them castles, farms, vineyards, and mills. Even common folk, in their wills, would leave a small sum to the order, believing it would help their souls and contribute to the defense of the Holy Land. The poor fellow soldiers were rapidly becoming astonishingly rich. The Templars used this newfound wealth to create a vast and efficient international network. They established local headquarters, known as preceptories or commanderies, across Europe. These were not just monasteries, they were recruitment centers, training grounds, and large-scale agricultural operations. The profits generated by these European estates funded the Templars' military campaigns in the East, creating a self-sustaining war machine that stretched from London to Jerusalem. Their role in the Holy Land also evolved dramatically. They were no longer simply bodyguards for pilgrims. They had become the elite, disciplined core of the Crusader armies. They were the shock troops, the special forces of their day, known for their unshakable discipline and their terrifying silent cavalry charges. They often turned the tide of battles. To see the black and white Templar banner, the bowcent, on the field, was to know that the fight's most ferocious moment was at hand. The image of the Knights Templar is one of swords and piety, of warrior monks charging into battle under a black and white banner. But their most lasting innovation, and the true source of their immense power, had little to do with combat. In a world without banks, the Templars, an order sworn to poverty, paradoxically became the most trusted financial institution in all of Christendom. To understand how this happened, you must first understand the danger of wealth in the Middle Ages. If you were a nobleman wanting to join the Crusades, or a king needing to pay an army, how did you move vast sums of gold and silver? Transporting it by land meant risking ambush by bandits at every turn. Sending it by sea meant risking pirates or a shipwreck. Moving money was a dangerous, often fatal, business. The Templars, with their fortified commanderies spread all across Europe and the Holy Land, devised an ingenious solution. They created what was, in effect, the world's first international banking system. A pilgrim, or a knight, could go to the Templar preceptory in London, for example, and deposit his gold for safekeeping. He was effectively opening an account with the order. In exchange for his deposit, he would be given not a heavy bag of coins, but a simple letter of credit. This was a note written in a complex cipher known only to the Templars, detailing the value of the funds he had deposited. To a thief, this piece of parchment was worthless, but to the Templars, it was a secure and binding promise. Upon arriving in the Holy Land, the traveler could then present his letter of credit at the Templar house in Jerusalem or Acre. The Templars there would verify the note, decode the cipher, and give him the equivalent amount in local currency. For this secure and convenient service, they charged a small administrative fee. They had invented a form of wire transfer 8 centuries before the telegraph. This system proved so reliable that it quickly expanded beyond pilgrims. Kings and popes began to use the Templars as their personal bankers. The Templar preceptory in Paris became the de facto treasury of France, managing the royal finances. The English crown stored its jewels in the vaults of the London Temple. The Templars loaned vast sums of money to nobles to finance wars and to monarchs to run their kingdoms, becoming creditors to the most powerful men in Europe. Their system worked because it was built on a unique foundation of trust. As a religious order, they were seen as being above the corruption of personal greed. As a military order, they had the armed strength to protect their assets from thieves and rival lords. And as a sovereign power, answering only to the Pope, they could operate across borders with an immunity that no secular merchant or moneylender could ever hope to achieve. At the height of their influence, the Knights Templar were a force unlike any other. They were an elite army with papal authority, a sovereign financial power with vaults full of gold, and a holy order shrouded in mystery. They were indispensable, was built upon a single sacred purpose: the defense of the Holy Land. So what would happen if the Holy Land was lost? By the late 13th century, the political sands of the Middle East had shifted dramatically. The initial fiery zeal for crusading that had swept through Europe 2 centuries earlier had cooled. Generations had passed, and the Crusader states, known as Outremer, were isolated, underfunded, and surrounded by increasingly unified and powerful Muslim forces. Most notably the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. The tide was turning, and the Christian foothold was crumbling. The final devastating blow came in 1291 with the siege of Acre. The city of Acre was the last major Cyprian stronghold on the mainland, a vibrant port and the capital of what remained of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Templars, along with the other military orders, mounted a desperate and heroic defense. They fought street by street, tower by tower, but they were vastly outnumbered. The city fell in a brutal storm of violence, and the Grand Master of the Templars himself was killed in the final futile stand. With the fall of Acre, the dream of a Christian-held Holy Land was over. The surviving Templar Knights, along with the Hospitallers and other Crusader forces, were forced to evacuate, retreating to the island of Cyprus. Their primary mission, the very reason for their existence, to protect pilgrims on the roads to Jerusalem, was now impossible. Their war had been lost, and they were an army in exile. This created a new and deeply uncomfortable question that began to be asked in the courts and councils of Europe. What is the purpose of the Knights Templar now? They were still an immensely wealthy and powerful standing army, with lands and preceptories scattered across the continent. But with no holy war to fight in the East, their continued existence as a privileged, tax-exempt military force seemed questionable. The perception of the order began to change. Their vast wealth, once seen as a necessary tool for a holy cause, was now viewed with jealousy and suspicion. Kings, particularly King Philip IV of France, who were deeply in debt to the order, no longer saw them as pious allies, but as arrogant and secretive international bankers who held his kingdom's finances in their grip. Their special privileges and their immunity from local laws bred deep resentment among secular lords and bishops. Into this climate of resentment, dark rumors began to fester. The Templars had always been a secretive order. Their initiation rites were conducted in private, and they were sworn to never reveal the inner workings of their chapter meetings. This secrecy, once a source of mystique, now became a breeding ground for suspicion. Whispers began to circulate about their rituals, their immense hidden treasure, and the possibility of heresy taking root within their closed and powerful society. The Knights Templar, now adrift without a clear purpose, had become a target, and the man who set his sights on them was the most powerful monarch in Europe, Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair for his handsome appearance, not his temperament. He was a deeply pious but utterly ruthless and ambitious king. He was determined to centralize power in France, and he saw the Templars, a sovereign power operating within his own borders, and to whom he owed a massive debt, as an intolerable threat. Philip's motivations were a cold mixture of power and finance. He had expensive wars to fund and a kingdom to run, and his treasury was perpetually strained. The Templars, meanwhile, were sitting on unimaginable wealth, their vaults in Paris holding fortunes that dwarfed his own. He coveted their riches, and he resented their independence. He and his ministers, most notably the cunning lawyer Guillaume de Nogaret, began to draw up a secret, audacious plan to eliminate the order and seize its assets. The plan was a masterpiece of coordination and secrecy. For months, King Philip prepared. He dispatched sealed letters to his royal agents, his seneschals and bailiffs, in every corner of the French kingdom. These letters contained a secret order, and they came with a stark warning. They were not to be opened until a specific, predetermined date, upon pain of death. Inside each was a command for a simultaneous, kingdom-wide strike against the Templars. That day was Friday, October 13th, 1307. The date would live on in infamy, forever associated with bad luck and sudden disaster. At dawn, all across France, Philip's men unsealed their orders and sprang the trap. They launched coordinated raids on every Templar castle, preceptory, and farm in the country. The operation was executed with swift, brutal efficiency, giving the knights no time to warn each other, organize a defense, or flee. The Templars were taken completely by surprise. Knights who had faced down armies in the Holy Land were roused from their beds, disarmed, and arrested by royal officials. In Paris, the elderly Grand Master, Jacques de Malle, who had been in France to meet with the Pope, was arrested, along with dozens of his ranking officers. Within hours, thousands of Templars, from the highest commanders to the lowest-ranking brothers, were in chains, their properties seized in the name of the king. Immediately following the arrests, a list of shocking charges was made public, designed to destroy the order's sacred reputation overnight. The Templars were accused of heresy. It was claimed that during their secret initiation ceremonies, new recruits were forced to deny Christ and spit upon the cross. They were accused of idolatry, of worshipping a mysterious bearded head known as Baphomet, and they were charged with institutionalized sacrilege and debauchery. The arrested knights were handed over to the authority of the Inquisition. But Philip's agents effectively controlled the proceedings. To extract the confessions needed to prove their case, the Templars were subjected to systematic and gruesome torture. Under the agony of the rack, sleep deprivation, and starvation, the will of many knights broke. They confessed to the bizarre and fabricated charges put before them, their words providing Philip with the ammunition he needed to condemn the entire order. With the Knights Templar imprisoned and their reputation shattered by slanderous accusations, the stage was set for the final act of their destruction. This would not be a swift execution, but a slow, agonizing legal battle that would unfold over 7 years. It was a process where the truth was irrelevant and the outcome was predetermined, orchestrated by a king who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The one man who could have saved the Templars was Pope Clement V. However, the Pope was in a dangerously weak position. He was a Frenchman who owed his election to King Philip's influence, and the papacy itself was no longer in Rome. It had been moved to Avignon in southern France, placing the Pope squarely within the French king's sphere of power. He was, in many ways, Philip's captive. The Pope ordered the trials to be suspended and demanded that all Templars be transferred to the Church's custody. For a moment, it seemed as though he would stand up to the king and ensure a fair hearing. But Philip held all the cards. He used the confessions, extracted under torture, as powerful propaganda, claiming he had saved Christendom from a nest of heretics. He applied immense political pressure on the Pope, even threatening to put a previous long-dead Pope on trial for heresy, a move that would have plunged the Church into a catastrophic crisis. Cornered and intimidated, Pope Clement buckled, eventually agreeing to allow the Inquisition to proceed, albeit under papal authority. During papal hearings, where torture was not immediately applied, hundreds of knights bravely retracted their confessions. They explained in detail how they had been tortured into admitting to lies. A formal defense of the order was mounted, with knights stepping forward to argue its innocence and centuries of faithful service to the Church. It seemed as if the truth might finally cut through the web of lies. To silence this growing defense, he invoked a cruel inquisitorial rule. He declared that the knights who had retracted their confessions were relapsed heretics, a crime for which the punishment was death. In May of 1310, 54 prominent Templars were taken to a field outside Paris and slowly burned at the stake. The message was clear and terrifying. To defend the order was to invite an agonizing death. But King Philip, taking no chances, marched his army to the outskirts of Vienne, a thinly veiled threat to the proceedings. The papal bull, Vox in ex, a subtle but important distinction, but were disbanded to prevent further scandal and to appease a powerful king. The order was broken, but the fates of its thousands of members, its vast wealth, and its highest leaders had yet to be sealed. And other high-ranking Templar officials had languished in a Paris dungeon. After the order's dissolution, their final sentencing was at hand. In March of 1314, they were led out onto a public scaffold erected in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral. A commission of cardinals read their sentence. Because they had confessed to heresy, they would be condemned to perpetual imprisonment. As the sentence was read, the elderly Jacques de Maule, his body weakened by years of imprisonment, found a final surge of strength. He and his companion, Geoffroy de Charny, stood before the crowd and loudly, defiantly retracted their confessions. They proclaimed that they had only confessed under the agony of torture, and that the order was, and always had been, holy and pure in the eyes of God. Acting immediately and without consulting the church officials, he declared them relapsed heretics. That very evening, de Maule and de Charny were taken to a small island in the river Seine, there in the shadow of the royal palace. They were slowly burned at the stake, their final moments a grim spectacle for the citizens of Paris. While likely a story created after the fact, it gained power because it came true. Pope Clement died just 1 month later, and King Philip himself died in a hunting accident before the year was out, cementing the legend of the Grand Master's curse in popular imagination. In places like England, Spain, and Portugal, where rulers were not as personally invested, most Templars were quietly absorbed into other military orders, particularly their old rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. Many were allowed to simply retire and live out their days in monasteries on a modest pension. The brutal purge was largely a French affair, and what became of their legendary treasure? But he was disappointed to find their liquid wealth, their gold and silver, was far less than he had imagined. The true treasure of the Templars was their vast network of land, farms, and properties. The Pope decreed that all of this should be transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. While the Hospitallers did inherit a great deal, Philip and other kings managed to hold on to a significant portion for themselves through taxes and legal fees, effectively getting the financial windfall they had sought all along. Their story never truly ended. It simply went underground, transforming from documented history into a powerful and enduring legend. The suddenness of their fall, the shocking nature of the accusations, and the mystery of their supposed hidden treasure created a vacuum that has been filled with speculation, romance, and conspiracy for over 700 years. They were international, operating beyond the full control of any single king, and they were immensely wealthy. When an organization this powerful is destroyed so quickly and so brutally, it leaves behind more questions than answers. It is human nature to try and fill in the blanks, and so the myth-making began. The story goes that on the eve of the arrests in 1307, the Templar fleet, docked at the port of La Rochelle, secretly slipped its moorings and sailed away into the night, carrying with it the order's main treasure and its most important archives. This myth suggests the order survived in secret, perhaps finding refuge in Scotland or Portugal to continue its work in the shadows. Perhaps the most famous myth is the supposed link between the Templars and the Freemasons. Many Masonic orders and rituals draw inspiration from the Templar legacy, incorporating their symbols and stories. In modern fiction, the Templars have been reimagined as the secret guardians of the world's greatest treasures, most notably the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or even the bloodline of Christ himself. The historical Templars were protectors of pilgrims and defenders of territory. There is nothing in their own records to suggest they were custodians of powerful mystical relics, but their true historical legacy is arguably more impressive than any myth. And as soldiers, their discipline and tactical doctrines had a profound influence on the development of European armies. Their real innovations shaped the world in tangible ways. Ultimately, the story of the Knights Templar serves as a timeless and tragic cautionary tale. It demonstrates how easily faith can be manipulated for political gain, and how secrecy, once a source of strength, can become a fatal weakness when wielded against you by your enemies. Our story now moves forward to the middle of the 14th century. The cities of Europe are growing, universities are flourishing, and magnificent cathedrals are rising towards the heavens. But a storm is gathering in the distant east, a biological tempest of unimaginable fury. It travels silently, carried not by armies or kings, but by the most humble of passengers, and it is about to bring Christendom to its knees. The story of the Black Death begins not in Europe, but thousands of miles away on the arid, windswept plains of Central Asia. There, in the 1330s, a virulent new strain of an ancient bacterium, Yersinia pestis, likely emerged. For centuries, this plague had existed in isolated rodent populations, but something had changed. This new form was exceptionally deadly, and it was beginning to spread. The mechanism of the plague was a grim and efficient partnership. The bacterium lived in the blood of black rats, a species that thrived in the burgeoning cities and settlements of humanity. The disease was transmitted from rat to rat, and from rat to human, by the bite of infected fleas. These rats and their deadly cargo were constant, unwelcome passengers on the merchant caravans and trading ships that linked the continents. The Great Silk Road, the network of trade routes that carried silk, spices, and other luxuries from east to west, now became a highway for death. The plague moved methodically along these arteries of commerce, striking down merchants and townspeople in the great trading hubs of Samarkand and Tabriz. But for Europe, it was still a distant rumor, a whisper of a terrible pestilence in a faraway land. In 1346, the Mongol army of the Golden Horde was laying siege to the Genoese trading post of Kaffa on the coast of the Black Sea. As the plague began to ravage the besieging Mongol army, their leader, Johnny Beg, resorted to a desperate and terrifying act of biological warfare. He ordered the corpses of his plague-stricken soldiers to be catapulted over the city walls, infecting the defenders within. The defenders were now trapped in a dying city. They set sail for home, desperate to outrun the horror. But they did not know that the invisible enemy was already aboard their ships, hidden in the fur of the rats in their cargo holds and in the blood of the fleas that infested their clothes. These ships became floating coffins. They were overcome with high fevers, painful swellings, and a swift, certain death. These were ghost ships, manned by dying men, sailing blindly towards the unsuspecting ports of Sicily, Genoa, and Venice, carrying the apocalypse with them. In October of 1347, 12 Genoese galleys sailed into the harbor of Messina in Sicily. They were the ships that had escaped the siege of Kaffa. To the horrified onlookers on the docks, they were a vision from hell. Most of the sailors aboard were already dead, and those who were still alive were gravely ill, covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. The Sicilian authorities, in a panic, ordered the death ships out of the harbor, but it was already too late. The plague had made landfall in Europe. The disease that came ashore was unlike anything people had ever seen. The most common form was the bubonic plague. Its horrifying hallmark was the appearance of buboes, smooth, egg-sized, and excruciatingly painful swellings of the lymph nodes, typically in the groin, armpits, or on the neck. These were soon followed by a high fever, chills, vomiting, and extreme weakness. If the buboes burst, a person might, on rare occasion, survive. If they didn't, death was almost certain within a week. This strain infected the lungs directly. It caused victims to cough up bloody sputum and was spread not by flea bites, but through the air, directly from person to person. It was incredibly contagious and incredibly deadly. The time from the first cough to death was often as little as 1 or 2 days. There were no buboes, just a swift and certain drowning in one's own fluids. The third and most lethal form was the septicemic plague. This was a direct infection of the bloodstream. The Yersinia pestis bacteria would multiply so rapidly in the blood that the body's defenses were instantly overwhelmed. A person could go to bed feeling perfectly healthy and be found dead the next morning, their body having succumbed before any of the telltale symptoms had time to appear. This form was always fatal. In the final stages of the disease, victims would often develop dark patches on their skin, particularly on the fingers, toes, and nose. This was acral necrosis, where the blood in the small capillaries clotted, causing the tissue to die. This gave the afflicted a ghastly, blackened appearance, a final, horrifying mark of the pestilence. There was no germ theory, no knowledge of bacteria or viruses. Learned physicians and scholars offered a dozen different explanations. Was it a miasma, a poisonous vapor released from the earth by earthquakes? Was it an unfavorable alignment of the planets? Or, as many came to believe, was it the wrath of God, a divine punishment for the sins of mankind? All their remedies, bloodletting, lancing the buboes, burning aromatic herbs, were utterly useless. From Messina, the plague spread with terrifying speed. The rats that had scrambled ashore from the death ships multiplied and moved inland, carrying their infected fleas with them. Other ships, unaware of the danger, carried the disease from Sicily to the major ports of the Italian mainland, Genoa, Pisa, and Venice. From there, it would fan out, moving along the trade routes like an invisible fire, consuming everything in its path. The Black Death was more than just a biological event. It was a force that ripped apart the very fabric of society. The pestilence did not just attack the body. It attacked the bonds of family, the authority of the church, the structures of government, and the fundamental rules of human decency. Faced with an unstoppable, incomprehensible apocalypse, the world of medieval Europe began to unravel. Fear was the first and most powerful contagion. The most basic human connections shattered. Healthy people fled from the sick, leaving their loved ones to die alone. In the words of one chronicler, brother abandoned brother, and oftentimes husband and wife. Most horrifically, parents refused to nurse their own ailing children as if they were strangers. Doctors would not visit the sick, and priests, fearing for their own lives, would not administer the last rites. The sheer scale of the death was impossible to manage. In the cities, the dead and dying lay in their homes and on the streets. Carts would roam the city with the cry, "Bring out your dead." With so many farmers and laborers dead, crops rotted in the fields, and livestock wandered untended. The economy ground to a halt as law and order dissolved into chaos. In the face of what seemed to be the end of the world, human behavior polarized into two extremes, and indulging in a desperate, final carnival of life. If death was coming tomorrow, they would live fully today. The opposite reaction was an explosion of extreme religious piety. Convinced that the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins, groups of penitents, known as the flagellants, emerged. They marched in long processions from town to town, stripped to the waist. publicly whipping themselves with leather scourges tipped with iron. They believed that by inflicting this pain upon themselves, they could atone for the world's wickedness and appease God's wrath. When prayers and penance failed to stop the dying, the terrified population began to search for a more tangible scapegoat. If God was not directly responsible, then surely someone else must be. This desperate need to assign blame would soon turn into a wave of horrific violence against the most vulnerable communities in Europe. Across the continent, and particularly in Germany and France, the Jewish population became the target of this desperate fury. Wild, baseless rumors spread like wildfire, accusing them of causing the plague by deliberately poisoning the wells. Though Jewish communities were dying from the plague at the same rate as their Christian neighbors, and though the Pope himself issued bulls declaring their innocence, it made no difference. Hysterical mobs, seeking an outlet for their terror, attacked Jewish quarters, burning homes and massacring thousands in a series of brutal pogroms. By 1351, after nearly 5 years of unrelenting horror, the first and most devastating wave of the Black Death began to recede. The pestilence had not vanished, but its initial, explosive fury was spent. The survivors stepped out from their shuttered homes into a world that was eerily quiet and profoundly changed. The air was no longer filled with the cries of the dying or the rumble of death carts, but with the silence of empty houses and abandoned fields. The great reaping was over, but the world it left behind was a new and alien landscape. The scale of the devastation is difficult for the modern mind to comprehend, while precise figures are impossible to know. Historians estimate that the Black Death killed between 30% and 60% of the entire population of Europe in a span of less than a decade. Somewhere between 75 and 200 million people across Eurasia and North Africa perished. In many cities, the death toll was over half. It was a demographic collapse on a scale never seen before or since. A wound cut so deep into the human population that it would take centuries to recover. This catastrophic loss of life, however, had a surprising and revolutionary consequence. It triggered the beginning of the end for the old feudal system. For centuries, the power of lords had been built on a surplus of cheap labor from peasants or serfs tied to the land. Suddenly, there was a massive labor shortage. The few peasants who survived were now a precious resource. For the first time, they had leverage. They could demand higher wages, better working conditions, and even the freedom to leave the land and seek better opportunities. The ruling classes tried to fight this change. They passed laws, like the Statute of Laborers in England, attempting to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and force peasants to stay on their manors. This backlash against the new power of the common laborer led to massive, violent uprisings across Europe, such as the Jacquerie in France and the Peasants' Revolt in England. Though these revolts were often brutally crushed, they were a clear sign that the old bonds of feudalism were shattering. The world was not going back to the way it was. The authority of the Church was also deeply wounded. Its inability to offer any rational explanation for the plague, or any effective protection from it, shook the faith of the populace. Prayers, processions, and relics had failed. The institution's moral standing was also damaged by the greed and opportunism of some clergy during the crisis. This widespread disillusionment planted seeds of doubt and criticism that would grow over the next century and a half, eventually blossoming into the Protestant Reformation. Paradoxically, from this unparalleled tragedy, the seeds of the Renaissance were watered. The shock of the plague forced a shift in thinking. With death so omnipresent, there was a new, intense focus on the value of life on Earth. Art began to grapple with themes of mortality in a more direct and humanistic way. Medicine, having been proven so utterly helpless, began a slow journey away from superstition and towards empirical observation. The old world, with its rigid focus on the afterlife, gave way to a new curiosity about humanity and the natural world. The Black Death was not a singular event. Though the great pandemic of the 14th century was the worst, the plague did not disappear. It returned in recurring, localized outbreaks every generation or so for the next 400 years. It became a permanent, terrifying shadow in European life, a recurring nightmare that continuously reminded people of their mortality and the fragility of their world. Each new outbreak reinforced the social and economic changes the first wave had begun. In the end, the Black Death was both a conclusion and a beginning. It was the apocalyptic final chapter of the High Middle Ages, an event that shattered a world built on faith, feudalism, and tradition. But from those ashes, a new world began to rise. It was a world with a more dynamic economy, a more questioning and secular spirit, and a new appreciation for human life and potential. The pestilence had been an agent of almost unimaginable destruction, but it was also the terrible, violent catalyst that cleared the way for the modern world to be born. And here, our long journey through the nights of history comes to a close. From the rigid society of feudal Japan to the rise and fall of the Knights Templar, and through the apocalyptic darkness of the plague, we have seen how different the world once was, and how the echoes of that past still shape our present. Thank you for spending this time with us here at Medieval Nocturnes. If you've found this journey through the shadows of the past to be a peaceful one, please consider subscribing. It allows us to continue creating these stories for you. May your rest be deep and your dreams be quiet. Good night.